from citizens before I came over here today. So that was kind of nice.
See, Mr. Commissioner Kernan isn't here, but it is 11 o'clock. So we'll... Okay. If we're all set, let's stand and say the pledge. First on the agenda is agenda approval. Is there any changes or corrections?
I'll make the motion to approve.
Thank you, Steve.
I'll second.
Thank you, Tom. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Public input. Okay. I see there's no other public in here, so we will close public input. And I guess consent agenda. Is there any corrections or changes there? All right. If I can get a motion.
I'll make the motion.
Steve?
I'll second.
Thank you, Tom. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. On to old business. D.W. Jones financial summary information.
I thought it might be helpful to put together more of a summary on the 4 properties that are being managed by D.W. Jones, so that you don't necessarily have to wade through even the pieces that you've been getting, and things that I think are the parts that we need to watch. So it's just the month that we have the most current financials, and then a little bit about the tenant status, and then a little bit about the financial status, and then where the variances are. And then the expectation is that if you have a question here, then you can dig deeper into the financial reports that you are provided to see, you know, if you can look at some of those things. So if it's helpful, I'll keep doing this to provide just a little bit better snapshot on what's going on with those apartments.
Yeah, like Meadows Edge occupancy at 85%. First thing I did was go to that spot and see what's vacant, and it explained it. So yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so good. I'm glad that is exactly what I was hoping would be the case with this, so, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
So
Next,
the only other question I had was just looking at the cash flow stuff from the end of March. We were at 309 and we're down to 215 and real rapidly.
Very fast, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the overall cash flow, you will notice on the May cash flow, there was a fairly significant payment that was made to D.W. Jones, and that was so that the property taxes could be paid. That is not reflective on the statements that, the other statements, because theirs are through April, so we aren't seeing that. The other thing from a cash flow perspective for you overall is your first half settlements should be coming here shortly. We need to get together with the auditor to figure out the administrative or the accounting part of that, is how do we get those tax settlements to where they need, from the county accounts into the HRA accounts. So you are a little light due to that reason. And it is standard from how you have operated. Your two big payments from an operations, your general operations just come in or May and December because of the tax levy. June, sorry.
That's fine.
June and December because of the levy, which is the majority of that. That does not talk about the bigger issue, on the apartments or the properties and those kinds of things, so.
So it's not uncommon to see that we had to pay taxes before we get tax revenue. So that should be offset, more than offset, so.
Yeah.
The cash flow is in a dip because of the time of the year.
And then the other thing is, the accounts receivable. Looking at that, especially at Meadows View, is 32,000.
Yeah.
Large number.
Yeah. Which is significant, which I understand is some damages.
So, I did a little bit of, additional look, at those receivables. In the case of Regency, the lion's share of that receivable is one tenant that, had quite a bit of damages. So once that tenant is, sort of out and taken care of, it's unlikely that large tenant, that large amount, it's over $10,000, will ever pay. Then that receivable will get more in line. It's much more of a mixed bag when it comes to Meadowview and Meadows Edge. There were several tenants that have longer delinquencies, and then there are some damages that are associated with that. Right now, it appears that there's one vacant unit at Meadowview and 5 more that will be coming vacant by the end of May. Boy, don't even know what day I'm at. By the end of May, and then at Meadows Edge, there's currently 4 vacant units and 5 more coming vacant by the end of May.
Is that one tenant still there? You said 10,000
No,
attributed to
they're
one.
gone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they're just working on getting that out. And then, again, it's the 32 and the 16 are much more of a mixed bag on what makes up those accounts receivables. Some of them are severely delinquent. Some of them have some repairs that are associated with them, so.
What kind of efforts are made to collect some of these?
I think that they're sent to collections, and that's really it. The HRA, if you had your own staff, you had the ability to use what's called revenue recapture. It is a process where tax revenues are taken from taxpayers if the debt is to a local unit of government. But in order to take advantage of that, you have to have your own staff. They don't allow a contractual relationship, so there's no way for you to use that. Revenue won't allow that to happen. And it's only moderately successful because many of the folks that end up being delinquent either don't file taxes or don't get tax returns back. So it is one mechanism that requires repayment, but it's not necessarily better than any other method.
Doesn't guarantee you're gonna get paid.
No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. It provides a tax lien or a lien on the individual, but if they don't file taxes, that's really the only way. It's property taxes and income taxes, and it's only based on state. And so if they don't file state taxes, then it really is not a way. So the only avenue that's available to you now is through traditional collections. And my understanding is that D.W. Jones does use traditional collections, but I would believe that once you get to a certain level, that people will tend to ignore it, unless they are really hard pressed to find a different residential situation. Because landlords, one of the things that we ask is whether or not you're delinquent with any past landlord. So if you're looking to rent again, it's, you really have to pay that debt, or you're unlikely to get the opportunity to rent from someone else.
So, do you know, do they use small claims court to try and collect?
I don't think so.
Because that's usually the last point. At least you get a judgment.
Right. And I do not believe that they use that. I believe that they use the standard collection process, and then it gets reported and those mechanisms.
Personally, I mean, I'm not okay with just coming to the conclusion that it's uncollectible until you exhaust all efforts. I don't buy into that, and I think people would take advantage of that.
How far behind do they get before you start the eviction process?
Well, I think that you can start the eviction process after the second month of non-payment. I'm not quite sure. So on the Meadow View, it looks like several of them are over 90 days. Some are 60.
Now, that's not acceptable.
Yeah, so there's quite a few that are over 90 days, that make up a lot of it, and some of them have some damages, but they're small in proportion to the amount of rent. So rent is really making up the lion's share of that receivable. So that's what the paperwork shows. I can't make any judgments about any of that. From my perspective, and I think that we need to look at the contract, is that before anything is actually written off, that it should come before the board, and that you should have the opportunity to ask those questions about how much due diligence has been done with this particular file before you allow it to be written off. So it does sort of give that check in place to make sure that every avenue has been exhausted before we do any write-offs.
I would actually like to know how they're addressing that on a continual basis.
Okay,
I think we need to have a conversation with
come in.
Lori and schedule her to come in. They should probably be here quarterly anyway.
yeah, I think so.
Because, I mean, you let this stuff get out of hand, and it just gets out of hand
Yeah.
in a real hurry, and then you can't get it back.
Yeah, they won't be able to overcome it.
Right.
And you're not only do you does it hurt the organization, but it actually hurts the tenant too, because if you let them get too far behind, they're not gonna be able to get out from under it. If you stay on top of it early enough, they actually have a chance to remedy it.
You know, we, if it's done quickly enough, you likely could minimize the vacancy to 1 month. Just because typically you have a deposit, So you can keep the deposit for non-rent, so you typically can sort of get it if you address it fast enough, depending on sort of all of the mechanics of it to really minimize the amount of damage that it does. And a couple of the things that I also noticed, and I'm not sure if this was a DW Jones policy, if it was an HRA policy, but there's a few of the tenants that have moved in under a $99 deposit. They had a special that they were doing for a while. And a couple of the ones who are delinquent, well, now you only have $99 to fall back on, as opposed to, you know, a full month's rent. So again, that's not, it might be an interesting way to fill apartments, but it might not necessarily be a great idea if you don't have perfect tenants. So it's you know, there's this pro and con, and again, I think that that's another question that we're probably gonna have to talk about, is that between those two buildings, it looks, or it appears that we have the potential for 15 vacant units between those two buildings. Well, that's a lot of units to try and fill. And so what kinds of things do we need to think about or have them think about in order to get those units back online?
And it's, you know, based on because the accounting is accrual, so you look at the accounting here and it looks like you're doing fine, but if you're not collecting,
Yeah, and you're not.
it's giving you a false sense that things are okay.
Yeah, and going back to like small claims court and that, I would be interested in finding out the costs and stuff like that. Because what it's sounding like is if a person doesn't pay their rent and is eventually evicted, there was no consequences.
Right.
You know, if we went to small claims court, at least there would be a judgment. Other landlords or whatever would be looking at this, and then perhaps the tenants would be realizing, okay, this is gonna be following me if I'm not paying my rent. Versus right now, is there any records besides our records that show?
Well, I think that they do use a collection agency. And so either, you know, Equifax or TransUnion or Experian are the three biggies. Or they use a collection company that, you know, RCB or RBC collections or whatever. So I think that there is some ding to a credit report, but I don't know that it's necessarily, number one, that it's the most effective, or that it is as damning as, you know.
Yeah,
So I think it's worth having a conversation
Definitely.
about the process, and then is it making sure that we follow all the due diligence that we need to. So
Ultimately, in my experience, because I've been in a business at 100% charge, you know, you can have a collection agency, there's not very many good ones. Some will hound them to death. I mean, they'll just be on them to the point they're driving crazy. But ultimately, it always came down to small claims court and having to go fill out the application and show up yourself and actually get a judgment before you could get people to move and pay. Sad, but that's the way it is. And it's not expensive to go to small claim court. It's just an application. It's not very expensive, but it's the time. Somebody has to literally go.
That $99 deposit, you're just asking for trouble with that thing. And that
and
should
again,
not
I'm
be
not
a
sure,
policy.
that should have been something that was approved by the HRA board before they implemented that, but I don't know that. You know, it's truly, in that particular case, it's a decision that the board would have to make about how much risk you're willing to take on. Because in the case that you end up with non-payment of rent and they move out, you only have $99, so you're not even capturing 1 month's worth of rent. And
Okay.
then if there's damages besides that, that really does, you know, and you can weigh the pros and cons and decide that. And I'm not saying that that's something that, you know, you wouldn't decide is a good idea. I just don't know And it was only, it looks like there's only a few of the tenants that were brought in with a $99 deposit. So I don't know if they just used it to sort of fill when they first took on, or, you know, that I don't know, so.
Thank you. So if we're done with that, any more information on 6A? If not, we'll move on to 6B, Farden Housing Parcels.
So we have the east side of the property that has been platted, and we submitted the application to the planning commission for the platting of those parcels. That will be going to the planning commission on Monday, a week from, well, not quite a week. So next Monday, they'll be appearing at the planning commission. Once that happens, then we can move forward with the RFQ. Jeff and I had shown you a draft of that a couple months ago to look at. It was a combination RFQ and developers agreement or purchase agreement that we could use to advertise the lots that we have platted for sale. And then at that time, you can also decide whether or not you would want to offer the other 40 acres, which is on the west side of the road, as a whole unit, so a developer could purchase the entire 40 acres with the expectation that they have a certain time period with which to develop it into housing that meets the criteria that had been established, to set that. And then, or you could choose just to do the 7 lots and then move forward with a platting process in the future on that 40 acres. I believe that also as part of that, you should set a minimum purchase price. And I have an expectation of what I think it should be, but I'm waiting to get the rest of the costs associated with the platting so that we can incorporate those and make sure that we are recouping all of the costs that we can, and then yet still have the lots as reasonable so that they're hitting the target market that we're intending to sell to. So really no action that's necessary right now, just to let you know that we're moving forward, and that likely at the July meeting, we'll be able to take action to offer those, at least those initial 7 lots for sale.
All right, thank you. Any questions on that? All righty. 6C, Farden Industrial RFQ.
I can start and then,
Or I can.
okay, go ahead.
So we had contacted 4 companies directly and asked them to submit an RFQ or submit a proposal relative to this. And we got 1 response. We got 2 people that called and said, we'd really be interested in doing this, but we just don't have time right now. And 1 person didn't respond. And the proposal we got back is a little more than I anticipated it was gonna be. I had a conversation with them this morning, and we're gonna get together and have a conversation about what we really think we need the scope to be and what we really need first stages. And my goal would be to get this to be about a $12,000 or $15,000 study with the public input, and just get that amount. Have that conversation with the public, summarize the project goals, summarize the public concerns, and find the middle ground. And then we would take the balance of that and put that back on, you know, the engineering to move forward with the project once we make that decision. So I anticipate that we will, 1 of 2 things could happen. You could authorize us to approve a contract with Woodseth Smith and Nolting with the budget not to exceed this much, or you could give us a month to work those details out and bring you back an actual contract, I think is what we'd be asking.
The board's wishes?
I don't think it hurts to wait until July.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I was thinking that like myself, I know that the industrial park's gonna be a long process. to
I
get-
don't think it hurts to wait until July, and then I could tell you exactly what we're gonna get for that money. Right now, what I would be doing is negotiating with them to try to accommodate scoping the project the best possible way and making sure that we have a full public process so that we get all that data that we need. We don't want to wait too long, but I don't think waiting a month to get a revised proposal is going to hurt.
And voting on something today really wouldn't move up the timeline on it.
It would allow us to start 2 weeks earlier. It'd still take us 2 weeks to negotiate this, so I don't, if we take those 2 weeks to negotiate and in July you vote, they're going to start after that, so
Okay.
I don't think it's a delay.
Do we need a motion or just consensus?
I would, you know what? You could do one of two things. You could just table this to the July meeting.
Okay.
Motion to table this item to the July meeting would probably be the cleanest.
Okay,
I'll make that motion.
thank you, Tom.
I'll second.
Thank you, Steve. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Number 7A, new business, entry cost assistant program.
There's a couple of things that we really should look at when it comes to our entry cost assistance program. You've had this in place for a number of years. Generally, the way that the program has worked is that you will offer assistance in entry cost, which is either closing costs or down payment assistance, up to $7,500, depending on the need, with a few parameters. We have had a few applications that have come in, and there has been a couple things from a clarification perspective, and then a couple things that are a little out of date, and then just check-ins to make sure that the policy still meets the expectation of the board. So I have them classified under a couple different things. One is highlighted, and then one is under italics. So I'm just gonna go through those quick, and then we can go back and decide. The first one is that for a long time, there was a expectation that no more than 25% of the portfolio would be for mobile homes or modular housing. That becomes difficult, especially if it's on a permanent foundation. Is that bad? Is that, is it good? So it's just, is it something that you still want to sort of keep in mind, or is it really something that is not necessarily what you would want to do? The next one there is in italics, and the policy before had said that the household had to be 80% under statewide area median income adjusted for something, but it never identified what actual set of numbers was supposed to be used to arrive at the 80%. So if you looked at the statewide, that number was different. If you looked at Hubbard County, that number could have been different. So anyway, the expectation is much of this program was established to align with some of the first mortgage products that are available. So it would seem to use that if we used the income limits that align with the first mortgage products that they're generally trying to match, and then clearly identify what that is. So in the future, everybody knows exactly what product they're supposed to look at. So this is changing it to identify specifically what is the limits that we're supposed to use, and then what the current limit is. And so that is based on a household size of 4. So if there's 2 working adults, that's sort of where it ends up being. And then there is an additional caveat that if they're using an income program that is lower than that, you might still not be able to, so, that's, the fourth one there is, you had a maximum mortgage limit of $175,000, which is really problematic given what the market is today. So, I propose that we bump that up to 250, which based on that income limit is still, that is really more appropriate to the qualifications of an income limit that's listed in the item previous to that. So that's my recommendation when it comes to that. On the second page, again, those are the two really recommendations I had for clearing things up. And then on the second page, the item that I had a question about is real property worth of less than appraised value of $60,000. Is that something that you want to do? And if you do, is $60,000 the number that you really think is appropriate? The next one is the land. There's been a long history of only doing work for 10 acres. And then regardless of the number of acres, it can only be a third of the total value of the real estate. So it was really more about buying a house and not about buying a lot of acreage. And that's what this is expected to do, is the wording that is included in item number 9 is really intended to make sure that it's really about a house and not somebody really acquiring a lot of a property. And then item number 13 is that we've always wanted the borrower to have some skin in the game. And so we set a minimum that they would have to bring to the transaction of $500, so that even with the closing costs, they aren't walking in without having anything come out of their pocket for their housing transaction. And then a little further down the page, number 4 is just, do you want to make sure that your amount stays at $7,500 for your loan? So those are the bulk of the questions. On the highlighted ones, you don't have to do anything. There's really that, unless you feel like you want to change some of those. I don't have a strong recommendation one way or the other about whether or not you would change those. The two that are in italics, which is on page number 1, which is item 3 and number 4, those I do have some strong expectation, which I explained, is that I think that we really do need to make these changes to really serve the households that we are intending to serve with this program. So, questions or comments about?
I had one in number 3. You
Sure.
said that's based on a household of 4, but I was wondering, because if it is based on size of the home or household, because say a household of just 2 making $60,000 can afford a bigger mortgage than a household of 6 making $60,000. So maybe there should be based on size of a household too.
So, one of the things that can help to alleviate that issue is number 6 on the next page, when we talk about the front end ratios. So if a household is making a lot more, if it's a household of 2 and they're making those kinds of numbers, the ratios would likely just make them not need our funding in order for their down payment. There's also the requirement that those households have to have a fairly modest bank account. They're only allowed to have in all of their bank accounts $7,500. So the theory is that if you are a lower income house or a higher income household with only 2 and you meet that income qualification, there's other mechanisms that would likely disqualify you from being able to take advantage of this program. Because, you know, you likely would have more money in the bank, or if you don't and you're spent it, your back-end ratio might be higher, and so then it would disqualify you there, or your front-end ratio would get too low, so we wouldn't provide the resources as well,
Okay.
so.
The question, I guess number 9, where they talk about 33% of the total land value. I know the 10-acre numbers, a lot of times with commercial banks and that, they don't want to mortgage something that's over 10 acres. So I'm wondering if we need to address that at all. I could see though, like I say, if you had a 20-acre parcel and 10 or 15 of it was swamp, you know, that could affect it, but if the bank isn't gonna borrow anyhow because it's over 10 acres. So I don't know if we need to do anything with number 9 or not. I don't know how the rest of the board feels. I'm just going down, that's the only one I had any thoughts about. And like you talk about number 8, the real property worth less than an appraised value of $60,000. What are they buying for less than $60,000?
One of my concerns is that number, should that number be, in today's day and age, is 60,000, I mean, is it 80 or 90?
That's what
You
I
know,
wonder.
that was the only reason I highlighted it, is, I don't think it's bad to have the policy, it's just that, is 60 really where it should be, which is fine. But I would think it would be on the verge of being, either structurally obsolete or, potentially really not habitable at 60, and I can even think that 80 might be there, so that was the only reason I brought it up, and so it's like, you know, is that number appropriate?
And I mean, I guess there could be the possibility that there's something out there that's livable for under 60, and then we can't help a person that that's all they can afford. So I guess I'm comfortable leaving it as is for now. Like I say, I think about, when my daughter was looking at places, but this was a few years ago, and some of the places that were obviously in her price range, but I just explained to her that Dad didn't have time to fix it up, type of a thing, you know. But there may be situations where there could be, I don't know, so, like I say, I'm comfortable leaving it as it is for now.
Okay.
And then same with number 13.
Was 13 one that you added, or was it there before?
That has always been there, yeah.
With a different number then?
No, it's always been that number.
Oh,
I
okay.
just wanted to gut check on that number
Okay.
to make sure that you feel that that is appropriate.
I'd like to see him have a little bit of teeth in the game.
Yeah.
For sure. I don't, yeah, whether or not that's an appropriate number. I don't know.
That's the thing with today's market. Yeah, I don't know. So what's the board's wishes? Do they want to leave it at 500, or should we bump it up, or?
Well, my first thought was $1,000.
Okay. That number was in, that number was in my mind also.
I mean, if you're gonna enter into this agreement, you know, as a future property owner, it would be appreciated if you had a vested interest in it. It shows you're committed to it, and willing to risk that amount of money to have a place, so.
It made me think too that if you can't come up with 500 here, how are you going to be making your mortgage payments?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, your mortgage payment may not be $500,
No,
but
yeah.
And 1,000 would be pretty close to what they'd have to pay for a damage deposit. If they were
True.
renting.
True.
And the theory, I think, too, is even if they pay their first year's insurance, how many insurances are you gonna get that's less than $1,000 now? And so, it seems like a good practice, and I would agree that that's probably an inflationary number that makes more sense now than it did when these policies were written.
okay. So do we need a motion on that, or just a consensus?
Well, I think we'll, make a motion on all of the policies that, as a total, that this will be the set of policies. So that was, other than the $7,500, which again, in that particular case, I was just calling out the number that you're giving. I think that that's more than enough. I don't think that there needs any adjustment. So the, approval would be the policies as they are edited with the one change that we've made, or if you wanna make any other changes. And so then we'll implement these policies as
I
they
did,
are.
I did have one thought, and it's not italicized or anything like that, but, about the administrator being able to check on the county's tax roll and make sure it's paid. Well, is there a way that you find out fairly quickly if the first mortgage is being paid?
No. There really is not a good way of doing that, but what we have instituted is what's called a notice of foreclosure, which is really the only mechanism that we have available to know whether or not a property is going into default. So what happens is we file a mortgage and then we also file a notice of foreclosure. So if the property does go into foreclosure, we get the immediate notices as well. And then, unfortunately, by that time, there's not very many things that we can do about it, but at least we are privy to the process. Without filing that document, it is very likely that it will go through the entire process and we don't even learn about it until it's already done. So, yeah, unfortunately, there aren't.
Your mortgage information is private until you are being foreclosed, and then it is a public statement. So we have no ability to ask for private information.
The only alternative to that would be that we could ask for more ongoing credit reports, which, you know, there's an expense to that. So, and it's difficult because that would, you know, highlight whether or not they have not paid their mortgage typically. But there's not really any good ways of knowing other than that notice of foreclosure.
And there's no means for filing as a partial lien holder on any of the,
Well, we do file a mortgage with these, and so we are in the secondary mortgage position. And part of the policies say that we will not finance over 100% of the appraised value. So the theory is that there's enough value to support both mortgages that are in place. However, what typically ends up happening is that when someone goes into foreclosure, the value ends up being more than it would be for us to buy out, because our option would be to buy out and all of those things. So, you know, this tends to be a much more risky program, just because you are in that secondary position. You're having to trust that the bank is doing a good job with due diligence and nothing bad happens, because your payments don't kick in for 5 years. So, and the advantage of that is twofold, is that it really does help the homeowner get into their home, start making payments, hopefully get some income increases, so that when your payment kicks in, then they're adding that additional payment has given them 5 years to prepare for that. And so it really has set them up for success. And I would say that the vast majority of your borrowers have done exactly that. That in the percentages of your portfolio, you have had a successful program. We have not had that many that have defaulted on this particular program. But it is riskier. I mean,
What adds to the risk is, you know, it's a second mortgage, it is secondary to the first mortgage.
Right.
So that if they're, say the house was, they let the house go down the tubes, and then it's worth less than both mortgages combined, well, the first mortgage gets paid first. And then the second mortgage can be left with nothing or very, nothing.
They do have to qualify for the first mortgage. That's, I mean, that's the issue here is people who are paying $1,600 a month rent can never save enough money to get into a house. Whereas if they get into a house for $250,000 and they get down payment assistance, they've got the same payment, now they're building equity. Remember, we got 50% of the households in the city of Park Rapids are living in rentals. The American dream of owning a home has gone right down the tubes.
Where does the money come from for making these loans? I mean, do we have that in reserves for it, or what?
No, historically what you've done is use your levy. That was what part of the levy was intended for. When you started capturing that way back when, is that it was one way that you could self-fund a down payment assistance program for all of the reasons that home ownership is really good. And so that has how it was funded. Now there are enough repayments that you could limit your pool to whatever the balance is, and I must admit, I don't have that number with me right now. But you could look at what your loan portfolio is right now and say, okay, our program is gonna be capped at this dollar amount, we're not gonna put any more new money in, and then as payments come back, then we'll reopen it and make it available for new borrowers. Or you can continue to add to it by just using your own resources to provide that. Initially, there was, again, a deposit that was made specifically from levy, and then as loans have been made, they have come from that year's levy contribution.
All right. So then, do we need to make a motion to make the changes, add the italics?
Yep, if that's fine, make the changes as noted, which would be to approve the suggestion in italics and change number 13 on page 2 to $1,000.
Okay.
And then implement those policies, and we would make them effective then on the 1st of July.
Does that sound good to the board? Guess we'll find out if there's a motion made.
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Steve.
A second.
Thank you, David. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
And then what I can do, just to let you have some more follow-up thought about that, is next month I will make myself a note to bring the portfolio
Yeah.
so that you can see the number of loans that you have, what your balance is, and then you can have a conversation about whether or not, you know, you want to limit the program in any way or make any parameters about the funding portion of it.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay.
Thank you. Number 8, Director's Report.
I really only had one thing that I wanted to bring up. Again, it's really going to end up being discussions about future activities, but we had submitted the application for the Housing Trust Fund match. Minnesota Housing, the legislature had approved funding that would allow local units of government that had established housing trust funds to claim a match from that legislative appropriation. We had made enough contributions through our housing trust fund that we could have qualified for $225,000, which is what we had applied and requested, with the expectation that we would implement our own locally based owner-occupied housing rehabilitation program. And our application was denied, so we did not get funded. And so we will need to think through how we can fund that owner-occupied program locally, if that's what we want to do, or really move forward. You did approve an application to Minnesota Housing for utilizing their funding for owner-occupied rehab. From the time that you made that approval to when we tried to submit the application, they made significant changes to the qualification parameters. And as a result, we were not going to be able to qualify to be a lender, as in HLDC. We now have a staff person that we could use or go back after that program locally, and we may or may not do that. Right now, he's a relatively new staff person. He is a licensed lender, but we're letting him sort of get his feet wet before we start adding a lot more programs. But that is one way we could get not local money. That Minnesota housing program is very restrictive, and having the local resource would be an advantage to many of the households in Hubbard County. But I have to put my thinking cap on and see where we might be able to find the funding for starting our own program. So.
Would there be future funding available through the Minnesota Housing Trust Fund?
Potentially, but not with this. I don't know where they're taking more money from us than,
Yeah,
yeah.
so maybe a few years down the road.
Potentially,
type of
but
thing,
I wouldn't see it in the next bill or in the next budget.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be a waiting game, and I'm hoping that, our staff person, his name is Alan. Right now, he's working on the Small Cities Redevelopment Program, and, trying to get that off the ground. We have a large number of commercial businesses that are taking advantage of that program, so he's really busy. As that sort of gets more under his belt, I expect that we will apply to become a lender for Minnesota Housing. I think that it makes sense for us to do that, but it's gonna be a little bit. But I think that we still need to consider locally funding for those households that don't fit in the Minnesota program, but still need help. So there's those folks too. So it has not gotten off my radar. I just wanna say that it's still on my radar. I just have to put my thinking cap on to figure out how to make it work right now, so.
Thank you. And if there's nothing else to bring before the board,
Oh, I have to leave at 12 o'clock.
is that a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, I'll move to adjourn.
Tom?
I'll second.
Thank you, Steve. All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Good.